good afternoon, good evening, because there are people joining from all over the world, because I mean, that's the nature of both the pandemic and of the urgent need to roll out the vaccine. So thank you so much for that. A former editor of mine used to say, never use the words special and interesting in your stories. And he explained that you should reveal why it is special or why it is interesting. But really, those are the two of the first words that genuinely came to mind when I thought of today, because we have both a very special and interesting guest speaker, and also a very special and interesting course, which we want to introduce to you and the world. And thank you so much for joining us in doing so today. Our guest speaker will be Professor Salim Abdool Karim. He's here in my hometown, but he is absolutely of the world. He has association with Cornell University, with Harvard, with Columbia, and he directs Caprisa, which has been doing groundbreaking research in HIV and TB over the years. More about him later, because I also want to just briefly mention about this other special and interesting thing. Of course, it's about Let's Talk Vaccines, the course we're launching today. Over the course of the next hour and a half, you'll hear much more about the course, and you'll hear from Professor Karim just how important it is that we continue to track this really complex and evolving story. You will also get to meet the course authors, and very importantly, you on the call will have ample time today to put your questions to Professor Karim. He's been on the world stage in connection with international AIDS conferences. Just the other day, he testified to the House of Congress in the US. He recently won with Tony Fauci the Maddox Prize for excellent public service in terms of communicating science and therefore delivering an essential public service around COVID-19 itself, and of course the vaccine. So all of that in a special and interesting, we'll hope you'll find it so, packaged today. And I think I'll go straight to you, Professor Slim, as we all call you here in South Africa, around the world. I don't know if they call you that, but we're very, very thrilled that you're here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ida. So I'm going to, just going to try and share my screen. I'm going to spend the next 25 minutes or so sharing with you my perspective and giving you some information that I hope would be helpful in your quest to understand vaccines. And so I'll talk about vaccines and the variants, and I'll talk about just giving you a sort of glimpse of the range of complex issues that we deal with in vaccines. And I'm going to cover this by starting with, just by way of, giving you a bit of background, is I'll talk about the state of the South African epidemic, just very briefly. And then I'm going to go into I'll touch on some of the lessons that we've come away with from the past year, and then talk about vaccines, our progress, some of our problems, and some of our challenges as we move forward. So let's plunge into this. So when we look at the global situation, we can see that we have about 163 million cases reported so far, and about 3.3 million deaths. When we look at the overall trajectory of the global pandemic, you can see that we went through this particular dip in January and a bit of February, and that was largely due to the cases declining post-winter in Europe and in the US. Then we saw this rapid increase driven largely by India. And as the cases have started coming down in India, so too has the overall number in the global pandemic. So this just gives you some impression of where we stand as at a global level. Let's look at closer home. What does the epidemic look like in South Africa? Well, when we look at the earliest stages, we had our first case on the 5th of March. And at that point, when we had our first case, for the first 3 weeks, the epidemic in South Africa was growing rapidly. We had a doubling time of 2 days. And that was on track with the epidemic in the UK. So if you look at for the first 3 weeks, the epidemic in the UK and the epidemic in South Africa, we were neck and neck. And as you look at the cases occurring in both our countries, we were on track. However, South Africa took very early action. What we had was a situation where the president declared a state of disaster about 10 to 15 days after the first case. And by the time we got to about 3 weeks after the first case, we were in a lockdown. And all those early actions led to a situation where South Africa flattened the curve. The UK, which didn't take action for several weeks, you can see how the cases just continue to rise. So instead of South Africa having its first wave in April, as the UK did, we pushed that back about 8 to 9 weeks or so that our first wave occurred in July of last year. After the first wave, we went through this period of around about 100 days or so, where we were in low transmission. We had initially anticipated that we would have our second wave at the end of December, beginning of January, but it actually came a little earlier than we thought. And came earlier, about 2 weeks earlier, because of two things. The first was our high school students and our university students were going to have their parties. And they were not going to let some pandemic, interfere with their plans to have parties on the beach. And we, in the midst of all of that, we had a new variant. And that variant was a more transmissible variant. So when you look at our second wave, the second wave was faster and it grew to a higher peak. The number of admissions grew more rapidly. And just as fast as it came, we introduced our restrictions. And as we expected, about 10 days later, the number of cases went down. We are now currently in a low transmission again for about 100 days or so in the next 2 weeks or so. And we are now starting to see our cases rise again as we go into our third wave. So that's what the picture looks like in South Africa. To just confirm the importance of the current situation, we look at another measure called the test positivity proportion. Now, on the left-hand side, this is the average number of tests that are done each day in South Africa for each week. So in the current week that we're looking at, South Africa is averaging just under 35,000 tests per day. And if you look on the right-hand side, that's the proportion of tests that come back positive. We want to keep that below 5, which is the WHO recommended level. But when it starts going above 5, and in fact, as it goes above 10, we get very concerned because now we are heading into a second wave. And you can see how that increase leads us into each wave. As you see this increase occurring, it leads us into a new wave. And so we are heading into a new wave. And for anybody still not convinced that we are heading into a third wave, here's the evidence of the entire country divided up by provinces. And you can see that some provinces have made quite substantial progress in the third wave, and some of them are still at a low level, though all provinces are now slowly starting to increase. So there's no question that we are heading into our third wave. Now, what did we learn from the first and second waves that may be of help? Well, I can tell you I've learned hundreds of lessons, but I'll just pick 5 just to give you a sense of what has come out of it. I think the first is that it's quite important that for countries to really deal with a pandemic like this, you have to take the disease seriously and you have to act timeously. As has been shown in the UK that a 1 week advantage, if they had introduced their lockdown 1 week earlier, they would have had only half as many deaths in April in the UK. So just showing you, the importance of just 1 week. So Neil Ferguson's analysis, he was on their SAGE at the time, he showed how important being timely in your interventions are. And I think South Africa took difficult decisions bravely, and in the midst of a lot of uncertainty, made the difficult decisions and was willing to do what was needed in order to deal with our pandemic in our country. And even if they were unpopular, they were going to do it because they were the right things to do. And it was a lot of proactive planning. So in the 8 weeks that we bought due to flattening the curve, very detailed planning. Just to give you an example, we had detailed planning for oxygen because we knew oxygen saves lives. What's the single most important thing in the medical care of patients with COVID? Oxygen. Right. Now, if you do not have oxygen, patients are going to die. It's as simple as that. No oxygen, you die. Because your biggest single problem is your inability to transfer oxygen from the air that you breathe into your bloodstream. So you cannot oxygenate your blood. And that's what leads to the hypoxia, and that's what leads to death. And so when we looked at the situation and we did an analysis of the available oxygen, we knew straight away we were going to be short. We did not have enough oxygen for our first wave. And so what do we do about it? Well, we had to call the 4 big oxygen companies. We brought them together. Now, you're not allowed to do that. It falls foul of the Competition Commission. So we had to get special permission from the Competition Commission to bring these 4 companies, to put them around the table and to get them to collude to help us in order to ensure that we get enough oxygen. Well, when they looked at it, they said they can increase production. And even when they increased production, we were still going to run short. And so that's when it led to our next steps. What did we do? We asked them, how do we get more oxygen? Well, about half of all the oxygen they make goes to commercial processes, not to medical purposes. So they agreed that they will write to all of their customers, informing them that they will not receive oxygen when we are in a surge, and that all oxygen will be redirected to medical purposes. And so that's what was done. So South Africa never ran short of oxygen in the first wave. In the second wave, similarly, never ran short of oxygen. We had a bit of a challenge with oxygen supply by cylinders, but we never ran short of oxygen because we had done very detailed planning. The second lesson is that we have to be truthful and proactive in communicating with the public. I mean, we're seeing that in India right now, where Prime Minister Modi is just not available, he's not communicating. Whereas in our country, we have a situation where, as soon as things look like they're getting difficult, you can expect that there's a certain someone who's going to call a family meeting, and we will have a public presentation of what the situation is and what the course of action is for our country. And the whole idea being that everybody is kept proactively informed. And I have seen over this pandemic how truth has become a casualty. And when people are anxious, they come up with all kinds of conspiracies. I mean, the one I've done, I keep still dealing with this, that Bill Gates seems to be bored with his life because he's putting microchips in vaccines. And he created this epidemic so that he can give you those vaccines with the microchips, so that he can see where you're going and what you're doing. You can't believe that rational people will still believe all of these things. But one of my biggest problems has been that as the cases rise, as people become anxious, they want a miracle cure. And they're willing to take any miracle cure. In the first wave, I had to deal with hydroxychloroquine. And I had to deal with the artemisinin. In the second wave, I had to deal with ivermectin. So I still deal with all kinds of miracle cures. We want our cure. We know what the cure is. We don't need the scientists to figure it out. We know, here's the evidence, it works. Why do it work? Because, President Donald Trump's person, told us that it works. So we've had to deal with those issues. The third lesson I've learned is that the COVID response, as with any response, is going to have its errors, its problems, and its abuses. We learned how the military is not really well geared up to deal with policing jobs. And so we saw issues like the Collins Cosa situation. We had problems with people trying to figure out what to do about regulations. And so we had some irrational regulations before they had to be fixed. And for me, one of the biggest problems was that, and it's not unique to South Africa, is that when you are in a crisis situation, the scumbags will crawl out from under the scum and come out there and look for opportunities to personally benefit. And we saw that in the PPE corruption. The fourth lesson I learned is that South Africans are amazing. They can move mountains when they act together. Let me give you a simple example. South Africa has a company that we all know, and for those among us who are older, we know they make stoves and fridges and microwaves, a company called Defy. Well, at the beginning of the pandemic, they pivoted from making microwaves to making ventilators. So when you think about in the second wave, when we ran short of ventilators, you might have seen pictures on your screen about how Gift of the Givers was going around with the ventilator machines. Those were made by Defy. And they were made under a huge government program that funded them to pivot to make those ventilators. But I saw people, when we were on level 4, level 5, just the hardship, people were there to help other people. And we saw things like the creation of the Solidarity Fund, where those with wealth were making money available to help our country at a time of need. And then finally, I learned about how important it is to draw on the experiences that we've learned over this past year and a bit, so that we're better prepared for the next pandemic, creating an epidemic response unit, building local capacity for diagnostics and vaccines, something I'm pretty involved with right now, looking at local vaccine manufacturing. So lots of lessons. Now, let's go on to talking about COVID-19 vaccines. Let's start with progress. So when we look at the current situation, there are multiple vaccines that have been successfully developed through amazing scientific innovations. I mean, I cannot tell you, as somebody who has spent the last 30 odd years developing HIV vaccines, I would never have guessed that we would make a vaccine for COVID in less than a year. That is a truly amazing accomplishment. It's an accomplishment that actually wasn't made in a year. It was an accomplishment made possible because of the huge investments that were made in the capacity to make vaccines and the development of new technologies, because 2 of the vaccine technologies are completely new. We have no other vaccines with those technologies, the mRNA technology and the live viral vector technology. And if you want to know about what's the status of vaccine development in the world, well, you simply go to the New York Times. It's the most authoritative source, right? And even the WHO is running slightly behind the New York Times in terms of the Times is updated so well. And you can see here that if you look at the situation, we have 8 approved vaccines. We have 6 that have limited authorizations, and there are 27 vaccines in phase 3 trials. We are going to have a glut of vaccines if all of these 27 work and show that they are efficacious. You can see, and the pipeline still has even more vaccines coming down the line. So we are in a situation where within a matter of a year and a bit, we have 8 approved vaccines. That's quite something. Now, let's go on to looking at one of the challenges to those vaccines, and I'll touch on the new variants. So we know that all viruses mutate. That's just part of natural evolution. They mutate over time. HIV does so at high speed, and coronaviruses actually mutate very slowly. They have a general genetic drift of around 1 to 2 mutations per month. So minimal mutations in the coronavirus. And part of the reason for that, it has a proofreading step that protects it and makes sure that it's quite good about copying itself. But what we have now learned is that besides that slow drift, there are occasional shifts in the vaccine where there are large numbers of mutations that occur in one go. It seems that those are being made in a very specific way, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But currently, WHO and the CDC has declared these 5 variants as variants of concern. They are concerned because usually they transmit faster. Some instances, they even evade immune responses. So these 5 variants of concern are really the ones that we most worry about. And if anybody is wondering, how connected our world is, the B117 variant that was described in December in the UK is now in 114 countries. If you think that there's any way to really contain a variant and that it won't come to your country, well, think again. The variant that we described here in South Africa, the 501YV2, we described it in December, and it was at that point in no other country. It's now within a matter of 4 months in 68 countries where it's been reported. So just giving you some idea that you can't really contain this virus. No matter what stringent measures you want to put in place, this virus crosses borders. So what about these variants? What real concern do they have? Well, let's talk about how fast do they spread. Here, I'm presenting data on the trajectory of the first and second waves in the Western Cape. So if you look at the first wave, and that's in the light orange, you can see how the first wave rose, meandered along, and then came down. Compare that to the second wave, where it just kept rising. And we estimate, if you look at the cases in the Western Cape, it took 107 days to reach 100,000 cases in the Western Cape in the first wave. In the second wave, it took only 54 days to reach 100,000 cases. In other words, the virus was spreading about 50% faster. And that's been also assessed in mathematical models that show that it's about 50% more transmissible. So we have a virus that can spread much more rapidly. And because it spreads much more rapidly, it can come to dominate quite quickly. So let's look at these 3 countries, India, Brazil, and South Africa. All of them had significant first waves, but they all came out of it with, relatively wondering, well, it wasn't that bad. In fact, in all 3 countries, there were many claims. In South Africa, there was even a well-known scientist who claimed that people in high-density areas have generated this immunity because of previous exposure to cold viruses, right? Just nonsense, but that's what was said. The same professor believes that 40 to 45% of the population had already contracted the virus. Clearly wrong, because we now know that it was below 20%. And most importantly, claiming that we've now are reaching the threshold for herd immunity. So this belief after our first wave that, we have herd immunity, we don't need to worry about a second wave. In Brazil, exactly the same thing. They started talking about 66% exposure to the virus. They are herd immunity. The same thing in India. They're talking about the prevalence of 47% antibodies in Delhi. They've got herd immunity. In fact, Prime Minister Modi even declared that they had conquered this virus and were busy planning the end game. So what we see is that in all three countries, they created a sense of complacency in the misguided belief that they've now dealt with this problem. And that they didn't have it as bad as when you look at Spain and the US and so on, and that those countries were really struggling with this disease. And so in a place like India, they started allowing mass gatherings. If you ever want to create the conditions to spread this virus, have a mass gathering. And have a mass gathering, as they did in India, with 9.1 million people, you have a genuine way in which to spread this virus. So what happened in each of those three countries? Well, this is what happened. Each of them had a new variant. In India, they have the B1617, and there are subvariants of that. In Brazil, they had the P1 variant, and there's a subvariant of that, P2. And in South Africa, we had the B1351, or what we refer to as the 501YV2 variant. In each of these cases, the variants created a really massive second wave, a second wave that was much worse than the first. And when we look at part of the reason for that, is that the hope that natural infection would protect you and that you would not get reinfected was found to be fallacious. And fortuitously in South Africa, there was a vaccine trial underway where about 1/3 of the participants had past infection and 2/3 didn't. And in this study, what did we find? The attack rate in the first 60 days of the trial, the number of new COVID-19 infections was 5.3% in those with no past infection and 5.2% in those with past infection. In other words, past infection didn't protect you, right? It provided at best some partial immunity. So we're learning that you can't really depend on this. And you might remember that there was something called the Barrington Declaration. They said, why don't we just let the virus spread? Sweden took the same approach. Let the virus spread, let people just get infected naturally, and they will then be protected, and they won't get infected again, we'll get herd immunity. Now we know that's just desperately wrong, and that the virus can mutate, and as it creates new variants, it can escape immunity. Does it affect vaccines? Well, South Africa, again, is a place where we can provide some empiric data. Because South Africa has such a well-developed clinical trial infrastructure, largely because of HIV vaccine research, we were involved, this country was involved in 4 of the 8 approved vaccines. The clinical trials of half of all the vaccines were done here. And if we look at what those results show, well, for the AstraZeneca vaccine, it was shown to be 70% efficacious in the UK. But in South Africa, against the 501Y2V2 variant, it was only 10% efficacious. In the Novavax trial, which showed 89% protection in the UK, but only 43% protection in South Africa. That's deeply concerning that both these vaccines, they lose efficacy when they are in a setting of the B1351 variant that we have circulating in South Africa. Now, one of the questions is that in both these trials, the AstraZeneca and Novavax trials, they didn't really include, well, they didn't include old people. So they didn't really have severe cases. Neither of these studies, there was not a single case of severe infection, either in the controls or in the vaccinated. So we can't really make much in terms of, does it protect against severe infection? But does it protect against any infection, mild and moderate infections? No, these vaccines are compromised in terms of their efficacy for mild and moderate infections. Whether they protect against severe infection, we don't know the answer to that because those studies haven't been done. Many people will conjecture on either side of that argument, but that's all it is, conjecture. Fortunately, of the 4 trials, vaccine trials that were done in South Africa, 2 of them showed some very positive results. One of them was the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which showed 72% protection in the US, 66% protection in Brazil, and 64% protection in South Africa. All of those 3 are within the margin of error. So what we found was that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is pretty consistent in protecting regardless of what your variant is. Whether you have the P1 variant in Brazil, or the B1351 variant in South Africa, or the D614G in the US, this vaccine works reasonably well across all those settings. And fortunately for us, the Pfizer vaccine, when it was initially tested, remember the Pfizer vaccine was one of the first trials that was initiated, South Africa was included in that trial. And what we know after 6 months of follow-up of the Pfizer vaccine trial is that in the US, the Pfizer vaccine is about 91 to 95% efficacious. In South Africa, we at this point have had not a single infection among those who've been vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccine. In the control group, there have been about 9 infections, 6 of which are from the B1351 variant. So at this point, it looks like the Pfizer vaccine protects quite well against the variant. So we have good news and we have bad news. It also tells us that the vaccines are not all equal against the variants and that some of them do well and some of them not so well. So let me go on to vaccine nationalism and touch on that as one of the problems that we're dealing with. And I can't say it better than Dr. Tedros, who said that the world is on the brink of a catastrophic moral failure. Even as they speak the language of equitable access, some countries and companies continue to prioritize bilateral deals, going around COVAX, driving up prices, attempting to jump to the front of the queue. This is wrong. My own country did all of this. It, under immense political pressure to access vaccines before COVAX, they went around COVAX. They went to the same suppliers of COVAX. They went and negotiated to get doses outside of COVAX, and they jumped the queue, and they paid a higher price. I mean, we paid more for the AstraZeneca vaccines we bought from India than what AstraZeneca is selling it for their own vaccine in Europe. So just to jump the queue. So as we look at vaccine nationalism, it takes many shapes or forms. Some countries are buying vaccines that they don't need. I mean, Canada is a classic case in point. Canada bought enough vaccines to vaccinate every one of its citizens 5 times over. I don't know what you're going to do with all those vaccines, but they bought a lot of vaccines. Then you have other countries like the US chose not to join COVAX, which is intended to create global equity. And then we've seen how people have been striking deals with pharma, redirecting doses away from COVAX. And then we've seen how some have negotiated to jump the queue. Others have chosen just to simply approve unproven vaccines, India being a case in point. It approved its own vaccine, the Bharat vaccine, even before the phase 3 trials became available. China did the same. Russia did the same. So we've seen how in using their own muscle, they can approve vaccines, even though they haven't really been proven. And then we've seen how some manufacturing countries are banning export of vaccines to others as another way of this kind of vaccine nationalism that leads to an inequitable distribution of vaccines. And I thought I would quote what I said to the BBC, in that I've always sort of been deeply concerned about how we need to be looking towards the future and avoid this Trumpian me first vaccine nationalism. So I want my vaccines. I want it first. I don't care about anyone else. Can you just make sure I get my vaccines? And so there's this, fundamentally, there's a mistaken belief by some countries that they can vaccinate their populations and they'll be safe. That's simply not true. In the world that we live in right now, no country is safe until all countries are safe, or no one is safe until everyone is safe. There's no end game that sees one country succeeding in controlling the virus, while the rest of the world is dealing with rampant spread, because that just fosters new variants. So we have to stand together. That's the way in which we can really deal with this challenge. So let me end off with just touching on some of these challenges. So firstly, let me just deal with the issue of prioritization. In my view, it is unconscionable that low-risk adolescents are being vaccinated in some countries, while other countries can't even get doses to vaccinate those who are at highest risk, their healthcare workers and elderly. That is just inappropriate prioritization. And there's this mistaken belief that if you just vaccinate everybody, you can, go back to your old world. And actually, you don't care about others. If other countries, old people don't have vaccines, that's their problem. It's not my problem. Well, this is a pandemic. It's a pandemic. You deal with a pandemic globally. And so everybody being vaccinated is important. We've also seen the way in which we've had to deal with the conspiracy theory around the vaccines and, trying to deal with people raising issues about, oh, is it safe? Is there chips in it? I mean, just, the usual stuff that we're having to deal with. And then we have a problem that's, in the waiting, which is vaccine hesitancy. I mean, so far, it's not really been an issue because we're still battling to vaccinate those that want to be vaccinated. But pretty soon, we're going to have to get to those that don't want to be vaccinated, and they have to convince them. And we have to get to a point where we're vaccinating between somewhere in the region of 65, 70, or even up to 80% of our populations to get close to herd immunity. So let me touch on, just by way of concluding, just these key points, that it is really an amazing accomplishment of science that we managed to get vaccines within a year. Normally, it would take a decade before you have a vaccine. Vaccines provide individual benefit and they provide population benefit. We will not see population benefit for a long time. There are very few countries, if any, that will be able to achieve herd immunity sufficiently fast to avoid and prevent a third wave. So most countries in the world are going to see a third wave, right? Because we just haven't been able to get to 70, 80% of the population vaccinated. But the vaccines provide individual benefit, and that's what we're aiming for. We're trying to get vaccines into those who are at highest risk of severe disease, the elderly, those with comorbidities. So it provides individual benefit for them. Even though it doesn't stop the wave, it reduces the number of people requiring medical care. And that we really can't look at solving the problem of this pandemic as just a single action. We're just going to do vaccine, forget everything else. The reality is that we're going to have to use all our public health measures, and often in tandem with vaccines, so that we take a broad approach of combination prevention. And that our goal must be to achieve maximal viral suppression if we want to prevent the emergence of new variants. But even with all our efforts, we have to expect new variants, that new variants will be created. They are largely created in individuals with persistent infection who are immunocompromised, where the virus is able, when it gets exposed to antibodies, it can even generate immune escape. And so you've got to expect them, and we've got to work on that basis. And so no country is safe until every country is safe. But I'll end off on the note that we can defeat COVID. that we can take this opportunity to rediscover the benefits of our solidarity, our interconnectedness, and our interdependence. And no one can say it better, in my view, than Pope Francis. In this editorial in the New York Times, I'd like to quote him, if I may. The pandemic has exposed the paradox that while we are more connected, we are also more divided. To come out of this crisis better, we have to recover the knowledge that as a people, we have a shared destination. The pandemic has reminded us that no one is saved alone. What ties us to one another is what we commonly call solidarity. Solidarity is more than acts of generosity. As important as they are, it is the call to embrace the reality that we are bound by the bonds of reciprocity. In other words, I am safe because you are safe. You are safe because I am safe. We depend on our reciprocity. So on that note, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to share this with you. And I'd like to take this opportunity to formally launch the Let's Talk Vaccines course that is being put out by Ida and her team at Internews. Thank you very much, Ida.
Thank you so much, Professor Karim. Yes, all of the issues you mentioned are in fact handled in the course, and just the synergy between what you've said and what we are handling in the course is just astonishing, and I really look forward to journalists being able to see that for themselves. The staggering science and the incredibly fast speed at which it is moving, the unanswered questions in science, the equity issues that you mentioned, the assault on truth, which is something we work so hard at Internews to counter. But also the empathy that has to come with that, listening to people, trying to understand why it is that they think or believe what they do believe. And then, of course, also just this ongoing race between variants and the vaccine. I think many questions in the chat box are about that very issue, and we'll certainly have opportunity to put questions to Professor Karim. He's here with us for the next 45 minutes, so there will be plenty opportunity to ask more questions of Professor Karim and also of the course authors. And I would like for us to repeat the fact that the course has now been officially launched. Thank you for the honor, Professor Karim, of launching this course for us. And I'd like to go to my colleague, Michael Salzwiedel, to take you through just what it feels like to be taking this course. And then after that, the course authors of the various modules will talk in a little bit more depth about their modules. Thank you. Take it away, please, Michael. So if I can just, as we wait for Michael to come on, just to explain what his role is. So pretty soon you will see how the course is constituted, the various modules, science, access, logistics, confidence in the vaccine, and then also a component on source and resources. As we wait for Michael to come on, I just wanted to explain what his role is. He is a digital media guru, and I can only explain it by saying that he created this gallery into which we were able to hang our pictures, and the pictures are the various modules in the course. So really appreciate your role, Michael. And just one other word.
Thank you so much, Ida.
Thank you, Michael.
Sorry about that. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us for this really great event today, where we are delving into the intricacies of this pandemic that has gripped us all since March last year. What you're seeing on your screen right now is the homepage for our brand new course called Let's Talk Vaccines. And it is a free course for journalists and anyone working in communications who would like to learn more about telling more compelling stories, more meaningful stories about vaccines and how they work and how they're distributed and how we can better inform the public about them. This is the landing page for the course. If you do wish to enroll, which we obviously hope you do, please visit the course at internews.org/Let's Talk Vaccines. So when you land on the page, you will see a couple of paragraphs and images presenting to you what the course is about. I hope you can see my
Michael?
screen
Oh, yes.
scrolling down.
Yes,
There we go.
I was not seeing your screen share, but I see it now. Thank you.
Okay, it's going. The internet is just on a little bit of a go slow today, but we're winning slowly but surely. So the ideas really behind this course are to equip you as journalists to really get to grips with vaccines in a couple of broad areas: the science, the history, the access, the logistics, and issues about uptake or confidence. And we're going to delve into each of those areas with each of the three course authors in a few minutes. And then once you have, garnered that new knowledge and skills, we show you how to improve your storytelling around the vaccines so that you can craft and communicate more compelling journalism. We also point you in the direction of the most reliable and accurate sources and resources that we could find to include into this course. So this is the homepage, which also outlines the curriculum that you can expect. And once you do enroll for the course, you will see a page that looks like this, your welcome page. I'm just going to wait for it to pop up on the screen. There it is. So we're all about, promoting and enabling quality and effective vaccine journalism that really helps people to make decisions and to overcome this pandemic more quickly, as quickly as possible. So this is the welcome page, which you'll see first. Once you have signed in and enrolled, you will be greeted with this page, which explains a bit more about how the course works. This is not a textbook style course. We have included a lot of multimedia items, a lot of visual items, a lot of quizzes and exercises and resources. So it's a really rich and extensive and thorough learning experience. Through the course, you'll notice these blocks along the way. Did you know, little fun facts, but wait, there's more. If there's additional resources, you can consult elsewhere in the course. Exercises to, test your skills and put your brain to work a bit, flex your mental muscles. There's also some looming deadline blocks, which are there so that if you are in a rush to meet a deadline to submit a story and you're wondering where you can get the latest updates on whatever it is you're looking for, this will help you to do so as quickly and efficiently as possible. Check it out for links out to external resources and guides and tools and stories to help you further your knowledge even more. What's your step? We know that the issue of trying to understand vaccines and communicate those understandings to audiences who are often confused and uncertain and fearful is difficult. And as journalists, we have a tough job. So the course also tries to help you to avoid slipping up along the way, some of the common warning signs or red flags. I Get It is there just to clarify some problematic concepts or difficult concepts, and scientists don't yet know. There are many gaps in our knowledge and understanding of COVID-19 and the vaccines, and the course aims to bring your attention to some of these areas where the research is not yet complete or conclusive. So you'll notice that throughout the course. Then under Meet the Course team, you'll be able to see who your authors are, but I'm not going to give that game away right yet. We're going to meet them in person, and you'll go through the objectives and structure of the course as well, just to see how it's all going to work. The important thing to note here is that it is a self-learning course, so you can log on whenever you want with whichever device you want and engage with the course for however long you want, depending on your schedule and what suits you. So there are no set times. You can go through this as fast or as slowly as you would like. So yeah, that's kind of how the course is laid out on the platform. Remember, internews.org/let's talk vaccines in order to enroll. And we encourage you to do so soon, right after this meeting, and get stuck into the content. It's laid out in 5 distinct modules. They are vaccine science and research, vaccine access, vaccine logistics, vaccine confidence, and lastly, vaccine information sources and resources, as you'll see on the left here. So the idea is that when you have finished a topic or a section in a module, you click on this top arrow over here at the top right that says complete and continue, and then you will be able to progress through each respective section and complete each module until you reach the end of the course, at which point your brain will be full and you will be inspired to tell sharper stories, more effective stories. But in order to finish the quiz and finish the course and earn your certificate, you will need to pass this final quiz, which consists of 20 questions, and then you will have a chance to give us some feedback about the course, which we'd greatly appreciate, and then you'll earn your certificate. So that's the course in a nutshell. I'm now going to call on the three authors to run us through their respective modules, starting with Adele Baleta, who is the author of modules 1, 2, and 3. Thank you, Adele.
Hi, everybody. It's just such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for joining us. It is with great relief that we are launching this course. We've been very excited, and here we are today. So I think, Michael, let's start off with the vaccine science and research module. We've started this module very much as seeing it as a very important part of the whole vaccine story. The understanding is that the science and research is the backbone, really, of this whole pandemic. And I think that if anybody is not convinced by Professor Karim's talk, then I'm not sure what we're doing here. So, okay, so vaccine history, what I did to start off with was to actually show that vaccines have been around for a very, very long time. In fact, they date back right to the beginning with Jenner, and that's over 200 years ago. And just as much as the vaccines have started originally with smallpox, so did the anti-vaccination movement. So the issue around anti-vaccination started a long time ago, and a lot of the protest against vaccines was religious based. So there we show you the story. We give you videos to watch plus text about it, and very much then going on to how successful vaccines are, which may become very important in your reporting. Then after that, we sort of scroll down, Michael, we get to a situation where we actually show how journalists can use photographs to give impetus to their stories and to show the value of vaccines. And that also becomes very important. You'll see the looming deadline there. Thank you, Professor Karim. We're very excited because we use the looming deadline and we've used the vaccine, the New York Times vaccine tracker on many occasions, as we found it extremely useful and valuable for reporting. So people will be able to see that and click on it as they go through the course. That's, yes, I think we can move on now. That is a lot about the history of vaccines. And there's a photograph, for example. Let's move on to immunity. Immunity is there because it is vitally important. I think journalists need to understand, we as journalists, that an understanding of how the immune system works benefits us because we then will be able to understand how vaccines work. The way that I've approached this is to actually kind of de-jargonize the science so that there is a way to be able to report on the science, but in a way that is accessible. So there are examples there. Perhaps if you go lower down, we might have that visual of the, just a bit further, Michael. Yes, so if you look at that, we've used that as the analogy that we're going to use, and we're going to put things in military terms because really we want the understanding to come across that our bodies do fight. We actually do fight viruses. And I think that moving it away from the scientific terms all the time will be able to make something like this more accessible to your audience. So very much around taking the science, but putting it in a situation where we talk about how do you do the story. So journalists will then be able to see how they can translate the science into a story form. Then maybe we should go to population immunity. There's an example of a picture on how viruses infect cells. When we look at population immunity, Professor Karim has already spoken about this. It's very, very important. There's a lot of misunderstanding about population immunity and how to achieve it. There is no real consensus on exactly what percentage of the population needs to be vaccinated to achieve herd immunity. We do use the Swedish example that Professor Karim spoke about, and we actually take journalists through that example. And if you scroll lower down, we go through fact checks. So we give example of fact checks around the story and how journalists can actually fact check stories. Moving on through that, we show visuals around population herd immunity, what it actually means. And we actually even take issue with the word herd and try to speak about it in terms of population immunity. And that is all explained there. There's one of those scientists don't yet know boxes. We can now move on to vaccine development. So this is another section. Vaccine development is really a very, very important part for we as journalists to understand the process through which vaccines go through before they get registered. So this is the issues around clinical trials and how they're run. And why this is important, and we try to enforce this, is because of the issue of safety. And really the key message that's coming out here is that we want people hopefully to understand that the process is extremely rigorous. There's a lot of science that goes into this, and the process around safety is very rigorous right from the very beginning. And that is something that I think a lot of audiences don't really understand and then get quite anxious about issues of safety. So that's one of the ways for journalists to actually put across that message. If you go further down, Michael, another issue that we really try to debunk is the whole issue around this fast speed of vaccine trials, especially related to COVID-19 vaccines. And we actually debunk that or indicate ways in which you can debunk that, because a lot of the anti-vaccination movement are still, it's quite extraordinary, but I still see tweets around the fast-paced science. And in actual fact, it's not a negative thing. It's an extremely positive thing, as Professor Karim highlighted, that we have two new vaccine technologies out there that are going to benefit humankind. So this notion of things being too fast is actually a misnomer, and we try to indicate that in the course. We can now move perhaps to vaccine types, Michael. Oh, there's also a lovely, in telling the story, we have a infographic, it may come through, that's a guidance for journalists. It's an Internews graphic. It shows how to tell the story. There we go, reporting on clinical trials, tips on how to tell the story, especially around the clinical trials. We can now perhaps move to vaccine types. And the vaccine types, once again, looks at vaccines in general. So we look at traditional vaccines, the new vaccines that Professor Karim has spoken about, and specifically vaccines for COVID-19, because a lot of the information in the course actually pertains to vaccines in general, because we want this to live beyond COVID-19, whenever that ends, but that there are issues here that are vaccine related and that can actually be used in terms of routine immunization. So the course is very, very broad in that it looks at COVID, at the pandemic, but it also looks at vaccines in general. So let's see, we also very much link to our glossary. We've got a COVID-19 glossary, which has about 140 terms. That's another resource that journalists can look at if they don't know the meanings of terms. We have very short descriptions, and we also have a further longer description. We also have the different types, and we show you, and Michael, perhaps you can show how that's done. We show you the basic information about where the vaccine is. And then if you click on that bottle, it flips over and it shows how the vaccine works. The intention here is to make it interesting and to encourage interest. So each vaccine bottle has, we've got 7 of the vaccines that have been approved, and the information that pertains to them. Then Michael, perhaps we can go to vaccine monitoring. There's a lot more there. We're just giving you teasers to hopefully encourage you to join and take the course. There's some more. We have diagrams that are related to the topic, and of course, now when we come to vaccine monitoring, this is an incredibly important area in that it actually is going to become more important as that vaccine gets rolled out. And I think that there is a key message here, and a key takeaway is very much that while we look at the safety during the clinical trials, it doesn't stop there, that safety is continued to be looked at once the vaccine has been rolled out. And why we see this as very important is because, as many of you have actually explained in the chat, or you're raising issues in the chat about the AstraZeneca vaccine, for example, it is a place where we pick up rare adverse events. We talk about rare adverse events. What do they mean? What protocols are in place to deal with them, so that our audiences can understand that actually regulatory authorities have our back, actually. So there's this constant monitoring, because the idea is for people to be safely vaccinated. And I think that's a key message that we're trying to imprint here in our course. So Michael, let's go to vaccine access quickly. And access is, as Professor Karim has already outlined, and we deal with this quite in depth in the course. This is another module, and what we're looking at is we're looking at the continuing and ongoing battle for access. And I think Professor Karim has quite eloquently outlined the issue around vaccine nationalism, which we cover in the course. You can see that under equity. We have a special section under equity. We deal with those issues. What is vaccine hoarding really all about? But we do it within the framework of asking journalists and showing journalists how to track in their own countries that vaccines are being equitably distributed and rolled out. That becomes a very important part of the story. So if we move on, we can go then down to, we have podcasts as well. So, and we look at COVAX, a very important point. And I see that in the chat, there was a question around, well, you know, how good is COVAX actually? And yes, I think mistakes have been made, but I think that Professor Karim has also made the argument that we are going to definitely have bumps along the way. We do not live in a perfect world, but the point here is how are journalists telling the story? How are they tracking the story? And so here is a very important story underneath African Union. In terms of equity, we are asking journalists to follow the issue around intellectual property rights. It's a major story. We give what we have, but at the same time, we are saying these are the kinds of questions that you should be, that we as journalists need to be asking around intellectual property rights, and to be keeping it on the agenda, to be keeping it on our story agenda. Then we can go to governance, and governance is, again, I think an extremely important part of access, and I think it's very much around holding governments to account. So yes, acknowledging when governments are doing well, but then also holding governments to account in terms of access. So we want to follow the money. We want to see and how do we do that? How do we hold governments to account? And this is very much about storytelling. It's about asking those very critical questions around, has the government budgeted enough money for access to vaccines? Are they doing the necessary steps to make sure that we get that vaccine into arms? Following from that, we talk about following the money. We also look at issues around the rollout plan. The WHO insists on a rollout plan before vaccines can be rolled out. And many countries are in the process of rolling out the vaccine. But the question and the stories that we possibly want to be considering about writing are these rollouts being done in an equitable way? So we're looking again then at every group within society. Are marginalized groups being reached? Is there discrimination? Why is there discrimination? And we give examples of stories. I Want My Rights is a very is an example of how a journalist has looked at that issue and can be an example that one can take further. And certainly so far, we've actually had some indications about how people are really keen to write those kinds of stories. There are questions that we give as an example of what could be asked. So lots of the course is very much based in writing stories, how we can write stories and follow the story. Then the human rights aspect of this access module is really looking at, and again, it's really about the rights of every individual, their rights to healthcare. And we really are saying in this particular section that if health is a human right, then surely access to vaccines must be a human right as well. And we also have a section there on journalists, really how difficult it is to do our job. We also look at questions around challenges that maybe need to be made and put to media outlets about protections for journalists and so on. So you, the journalist, is not forgotten about in this course. Finally, the logistics module, we finding very on a consistent basis that we are getting to a situation where the logistics of rolling out the vaccine is a very big story, as is access, right? So the following of this rollout, we look here at regulation, okay? What is regulatory approval? What does it mean? And we look at it within the framework of the WHO's National Deployment and Vaccination Plan. So really what needs to be in place, but journalists following every step of the way. So storage, for example, are vaccines being stored in the way that they need to be? Is that refrigeration there? Are refrigerators on tap? These are the kinds of questions that are going to actually ultimately affect whether that vaccine is safe and effective, right? So we follow the steps along the way. And that really relates to the section on vaccine journeys. So in other words, what happens once that vaccine leaves the manufacturer's floor and gets delivered into a country? And many journalists are witnessing now the arrival of vaccines in countries, okay? So we started out working hard. We continued to really work hard and follow the story. So there you see the example of the National Deployment and Vaccination Plan. We look through the regulatory preparedness, and then we really do scrutinize the steps taken and needed in that rollout plan. And holding government to account at every step of the way. And then, Michael,
Adele?
I think you can go.
I wonder if we should move to, I think we should move to the module
Sure.
on confidence now and ask Kate, Kate Thomas, to tell us about that. Thank you. And do you remember there's an opportunity? Thank you. Everybody, there are lots of questions. You also sent some questions in advance. There's an opportunity to ask Professor Karim to answer these, and also the course authors if relevant. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thanks Adele and thanks Ida, and also to Jaya, the other module author, and of course to Professor Karim for his very compelling discussion points. So I authored the module on vaccine confidence. And to start with, let's just dive into this. Why did we choose to include a module on vaccine confidence within this course on COVID-19 vaccines? Well, because although the science, access, and logistics are the core technical aspects of the COVID-19 vaccination plan, none of these things is effective without vaccine uptake. And to put that in very plain English, vaccines only work when people are willing to take them. So vaccine uptake is a really complex matter that depends upon things that are quite nebulous and hard to measure, but that we talk a lot about in our work at Internews, such as trust. And that can manifest as trust or lack of trust in the health system, in the public health response, in government, in public-facing communications, or even trust in your fellow community members, trust in in doctors working at health centers, and there are a lot of historical and contextual reasons behind all of these things that we unpack in the module and equip you with tools and understanding of the factors that drive vaccine hesitancy. And of course, trust is something that's also at the center of the very human story about the COVID-19 pandemic. Human stories are, of course, very compelling and important for journalists, and they're also important for increasing empathy and finding more meaning and understanding in our world, which, as Professor Karim noted, can sometimes be quite disconnected. I'm sure that all of us, even as journalists covering this science story, know people or have met people who express hesitancy about getting vaccinated for COVID-19. But have we unpacked the deep layers that make up the reasons why? As far as I'm concerned, the human story and the science story have to sit together. They are intimately connected. They just can't be separated. And that's why we've included this module here. So as you can see on the screen, we look at the historical context of vaccine hesitancy. We learn from disciplines as diverse as health psychology, risk communications, medical anthropology, health promotion, and geopolitics. And as Adele has mentioned, there is this myth that vaccine hesitancy is a new thing that's driven by the growth of social media, but actually it goes back to the development of the very first vaccine for smallpox hundreds of years ago. So we look at what there is in common between people who were anti-vaccination then and those people we're seeing now. And that really helps us look at the context of this. We also look at tips and techniques that you as journalists can use in your work. And I'm just talking generally here, so I think, Michael, please keep scrolling as you see fit. But we give you ideas for how to avoid falling into the trap of sensationalist headlines, or things you can do to ensure that your headlines are as precise and accurate as possible, that they really meet and capture the science and still capture people's attention. Because that doesn't have to be a choice between compelling and accurate. We can actually have both. One of the biggest challenges that we face as journalists in our work at the moment is sharing truth in a world that is increasingly polluted by misinformation. And I think that you'll find that this module gets to the very heart of this mission and helps you wade through the contextual reasons that make people share misinformation, and leaves you better equipped to respond to rumors with accurate, scientifically grounded information that is also rooted in empathy and compassion. And you can see these headlines, just going back to my previous point, on the screen. There are many different ways of reporting the figures, and really understanding, in concert with looking at the information in the other modules, how we can best use our knowledge about vaccine hesitancy to inform the development and the crafting of helpful headlines and visuals too. But just to go back to my point about compassion and empathy, well, you can argue, why should we even bother to be compassionate towards people who spread misinformation about COVID-19 vaccines? Well, it's a good question, but also there is evidence now from social science studies that when we avoid judging and shaming people for their beliefs, and instead respond from a place of understanding and empathy, we have a better chance of inviting them to believe in evidence-based medicine and science. And as Professor Karim explained, some misinformation comes from fear and anxiety. Rumors throughout centuries have been used as sense-making mechanisms that people share to help them make sense of new developments and ideas that scare them. So when we understand all of this, we can respond from a more informed place. And just finally to say, as journalists, you are in this fantastic role of being trusted communicators among your audiences. And so vaccine hesitancy and confidence is also an area in which your work directly contributes to improvements. So you have an important role to play in contributing to greater vaccine confidence by sharing accurate, accessible, and easily digestible information about the vaccines. So we take an evidence-informed, empathetic approach to understanding why people are hesitant about vaccines, and we share tips, techniques, and case studies. Here's one just on the screen right now, how Elvis Presley inspired vaccine confidence. I believe this was in the 1950s in the US, and had a fantastic effect on people's trust in polio vaccines at a time when public confidence was low. So we also look at, techniques such as working with public figures, interviews with experts, how those things really help strengthen your reporting and help get the right information to people. And just to conclude, I'm seeing a few questions pop up in the chat about, what can we do when we encounter populations who are vaccine hesitant or individuals? And I'm not saying it's easy. I think to answer that, just to sort of preempt that question, I think the resources here that we've put together across the modules, this real, multidisciplinary approach where you can draw on the scientific data in the science module, the access pieces, and the psychological aspects in the vaccine hesitancy module will give you a really good grounding in approaching this. But I will say, as journalists, the job is to build a healthy information ecosystem. It's very difficult to control misinformation, but what we can do is share enough accurate information that floods out the rumors and misinformation, and responding to misinformation and rumors with scientifically grounded, accurate information that really meets people where they're at, rather than shaming or judging them. Vaccine hesitancy is not a black and white thing where there are two buckets. You either trust vaccines or you don't. That's not how it works. The way it works is it actually is a continuum, and many people sit somewhere in the middle. Many people will ask some questions before taking vaccines. They want to make sure it's safe, for example. And it's the people who are in the not sure, wait and see, I might take the vaccine, that we have the best chance of reaching, rather than those who are vehemently anti-vaccination. So my advice would be to reach audiences who have questions, who are curious and want to know more, and focus there. Something else we have seen in other countries around the world is that as more and more people are receiving the COVID vaccine, it's the stories, it's the human stories again. If my neighbor received the vaccine and somebody else was hesitant about taking the vaccine, if they hear that that went well, the person has had a positive experience, then they may be more likely to take the vaccine. So again, as journalists, there's a really important piece to play there in sharing positive stories about people's experiences with the COVID vaccine. And so, as again, going back to Professor Karim's really eloquent words, we are all connected. And I think it's about drawing those connections and accentuating them in your work as journalists. And you really have a lot of power in doing that. And I can't wait to see how this course really takes your reporting to another level. So thanks for being here and listening, and really looking forward to your feedback.
Thank you so much, Kate. I would like to ask Jaya Sridhar, Dr. Jaya Sridhar, who wrote the section on sources and resources, to talk to us about this very important component of our work as journalists. I did also just want to mention here that we're in fact launching a second course today called Let's Talk COVID-19. You can hear that it's a sister course, because what's really important is that, even as we're chasing the virus story and we'll be watching it for really years to come, we have to do absolutely the same with the COVID-19 story, because the virus is still with us. We still need treatment. We still need to understand the unfolding of these various waves, which Professor Karim described to us. So Jaya is both the author of that, of the sources and resources module, and of the entire Let's Talk COVID-19 course, which we'll also share in the link for you to have side by side with the Let's Talk Vaccines course. Thank you, Jaya.
Thanks, Ida, and thanks, Professor Dr. Karim, for that wonderful presentation. And thanks also to my co-authors and to Michael for putting all the information that we've sort of brought together on this wonderful teaching platform. And welcome to the group who's here still with us. We see many people enrolling, so we're absolutely thrilled. We've put a lot of love and hard work, some sweat and tears into this course. Because one of the things that's always struck us about this pandemic right from the get-go has been the amazing way that scientists from all over the world have collaborated to really speed up the response to the pandemic in as effective a way as possible. And I think as journalists, we haven't lagged behind. We've been learning furiously and fast from each other, reading each other's work, and storing the best pieces, the most excellent pieces of reporting that we have. And that's a brilliant way to learn how to improve our own reporting on the pandemic. So in this final module of the Let's Talk COVID Vaccines course, we've tried to sort of make sure that you have the tools to cut through the thicket of misinformation and disinformation that's come to characterize this pandemic. So we've tried to give a set of practical tools here, how to search for vaccine studies online, for instance. If you just open up a Google search, you're going to be inundated with about 1 million results. So how do you find your way to the study that you're looking for, to that data that you're searching for? The second part of the section deals with how do you deal really with preprint research, which is a huge sort of a quicksand area where many a journalist of high repute has gotten into a little bit of a sticky situation as they've pulled the trigger too fast and come out with a story that's later retracted by the researchers and so forth. So there's a little bit of a bunch of tips there for you as to how to report on preprint research. Another key aspect of vaccine reporting is how to include diverse voices in your stories. This is something that Dr. Karim touched upon. When you make sure that you have enough voices from the most vulnerable, from the most marginalized, from people all over the world whose voices are not heard in this whole story, how do you get the vaccine to them? So how do you make sure that you include their concerns in your story? And then we've also included a little bit of a section on what are all the sources of online information that's available out there, both from the UN agencies, from research institutions. We've sort of curated and put together a list of the most authentic and the best and the simplest. And many of the WHO websites, the Johns Hopkins websites, and from other leading research institutions from all over the world have, over time, as the pandemic has unfolded, we find that the language on their sites have become simpler and more communicative, which is a huge blessing for journalists. We've also curated and put together a list of some of the best pieces of writing on the pandemic. So you'll see how Stat News has reported something, how the National Public Radio talks about, vaccine access. What is the Washington Post saying about the Pfizer and the Moderna coronavirus vaccines? And, what are the ingredients? What are the vaccines to follow? What kinds of trackers are available out there? So it's all there for you in one place and making it really easy for you. And at the very end, we've also connected to Internews's own COVID-19 glossary, where we've worked hard to put together in one place a set of the most commonly used scientific and research terms and commonly used terms that relate to the pandemic. So you can go and look up the meanings of words there to help you put your story together in as quickly a time as possible. So we encourage you to check out these sites, and we also welcome your feedback and response. Please share with us some of the best stories that you have come across, share some of the best sources that you have access to that you think might be useful to journalists around the world, and help us to make these courses a living online community of learning and best practices. I'd just like to end by saying that I'd just like to spend a minute to say that at the end of the course, there will be a quiz. And if you get more than 60% of the answers right, you get to earn a certificate. I'd say don't be happy with 60%, just go for the 100. You'll become an expert commentator in no time once you sort of take the course a couple of times or check out those modules that attract your interest, a few times. As my co-authors have pointed out, we've tried to make this course as engaging as possible. We've tried not to throw information at you, but make sure that you get to challenge your own skills and through exercises and through little quizzes to hold your attention and make sure that you engage body, mind, and soul with this exercise and make that absolutely reflect in your stories. Before I hand it back to Ida, I'd just like to say that it's been a very short time, actually. This pandemic has been with us for a short time, but it's been an incredibly long and weary journey. And I'd just like to send up a small prayer and a remembrance for colleagues, both from the worlds of medicine and journalism, who were there at the start of the journey, who are not with us anymore. Many lives have been lost. This is a serious business. So I think that this course ought to live. These courses ought to live for nothing other than just as a reminder of how journalists have to rise to the occasion when we have to report on the next pandemic. And believe me, the next pandemic is not far off. So we hope that these courses will set you on the path towards a longer vision, a larger vision of pandemic preparedness, because I think that journalists will be repeatedly called upon to engage much more deeply with the science of infectious diseases, with the new and emerging pandemics that are sure to come. So I wish you all the best, and above all, have fun with these courses. And so now, Ida, I'll turn it back to you, and looking forward to the question and answer session. Good luck.
Thank you very much, Jaya. That was a very important and chilling reminder of why we're here and how important our role is. I know that during the course of the pandemic, Professor Karim would often say that scientists are building this ship as we're sailing it, as we're sailing these rough waters, the ship is being built. And it's really absolutely the same for journalists, the quick-footedness, the empathy, the intelligence and the emotional intelligence with which we have to approach this story will be with us for a long time to come. And we hope that this course really helps you along that journey. This is an event for journalists, so we're going to go to questions now, but just before we do that, I want to just give one vote of thanks to an amazing group of journalists who helped us review this course, help us check for the little glitches, help us understand whether the quizzes we had put together kind of make sense. And they are from Liberia, from Rwanda, from Ethiopia, from Zimbabwe, from Kenya, from Uganda, from India, from France, from Egypt, from Indonesia, from Bosnia-Herzegovina, from Lithuania. Have I forgotten anybody? All of you from Brazil. Thank you so much. Some of you are on the call for actually helping us through, because this is such a serious endeavor and we really needed your help in bringing this to the world. And now we have been bringing COVID-19 and vaccine stories to the world. And we hope this extra tool here helps you make that a sustained matter for years to come. Professor Karim, there's so many questions in the chat box. I don't know if you've seen them. I can call out some of them. There is really opportunity for you journalists to really question Professor Karim on very many of the questions that you have. Maybe I'll just kick off by asking, if we could ask you to come back on camera, Professor Karim, that would be great. Just kick off by asking, are we going to win this race between variants and vaccines? It just seems like a race that it feels like a race we might not be able to win. What do you think?
So now you're asking me to put my crystal ball on the table and to look into it and conjure up what the future holds in store for us. So I think that when we look at how viruses evolve, I think we can reasonably expect that we will see several new variants. And I think as populations get vaccinated, the presence of vaccine antibodies in individuals who are immunocompromised may lead us down a path where we may start seeing variants that can escape vaccine immunity. That is what I think is going to be the likely scenario. Some people, have a more optimistic view that, the virus can't really mutate much more, and that what we're seeing is, where we are, we're not likely to see an immune escape variant from the vaccines. I'd like to say I'd like to believe that, but the evidence from other viruses certainly does not support that. So what is an endgame? An endgame that we're looking at is probably lying in one of two directions. The first is that we would generate a new technology that basically enables us to get rid of this disease. And that new technology could either be a cure or some kind of genetic manipulation or something like that. So that's still too far down the line. That's too far ahead of the curve. We don't have anything imminent. So the second is more likely, which is we'll develop a next generation vaccine. And there are at least two candidates that I know that look quite good. And those next gen vaccines will aim to achieve broadly neutralizing antibodies that cover a very wide range of variants. So that gives the virus very little room for maneuver. And if it does escape, it's not a well-adapted vaccine. So in other words, it can't really transmit faster, so it won't come to dominate. So I think that's the direction we're heading for in science. And I think that's the likely scenario, which means, sadly, that after we've vaccinated the whole world, we're probably going to have to vaccinate them again. And maybe even again after that, before we really, see an end game.
Thanks, Professor Karim. That's really sobering. And I wanted to ask you also, I couldn't get to all of your credentials and your worldwide exposure to the science as it is unfolding, but he really is a world authority and has also been recently appointed to the Science Council of the WHO to advise that body on issues of emerging science. So the other question I wanted to ask you before we go to the many questions on the call is there something that you know about the vaccine that you just don't see reported in the media or think about?
I think the piece that's most concerning for me, that I have, people ask me, does anything give you sleepless nights? No, not particularly. I sleep very little, but when I do have sleepless moments, they revolve around a critical question in vaccines that we don't yet have a clear answer to. And that question is, to what extent are vaccines effective in preventing onward transmission? So what we know is that even those, let me just get rid of this. What we know is that even those individuals who are vaccinated, that several of them are going to get infected. It's just, the vaccines are not 100% efficacious. If you take a vaccine like J&J, which I got, it's only 64% effective in South Africa, which means that 36% exposure, 36% of those exposed will get infected. So about 2 out of 3 exposures are protected by the vaccine, 1 out of 3 is not. So that means about 1/3 of those who get exposed will get infected. And when you take that this infection is in the millions of people, that's still a lot of people who are going to get infected despite being vaccinated. So the question comes about that if you are infected when you've been vaccinated, do you still transmit the virus to others? Do you still spread the virus? Why is that important? It's important because we are depending on vaccination for herd immunity. We are depending on people being vaccinated, not transmitting the virus. If vaccinated people transmit the virus, then all bets are off. You can't get herd immunity if vaccinated people are busy spreading the virus around. So that's a critically important question. And we don't really have an answer. There's some clues. There are studies that now suggest that those who've received, for example, the Pfizer vaccine, have lower levels of virus in their nose when they do become infected. Now, whether that translates into less transmission or not is not known. So at this point, we do not have evidence and an answer to probably one of the most critical questions. If you are looking at population immunity as your end game, and population immunity meaning you've reached enough people who are protected, and that means they don't transmit, because the moment they transmit or sufficient numbers of them transmit, then you can't achieve herd immunity. And I think that's a question that is quite a complicated question to answer. And it's quite a complicated question to ask, but it's a critically important question.
Thanks, Professor Karim. There are many more questions in the chat, and I'd like to introduce my colleague Tole Nyata, who's also been on this journey with us creating the course. And Tole has been monitoring your questions. Tole, what are some of the key questions that have come up? And perhaps some of you may also want to ask the question in your own voice. There's still time for that. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll bunch them into like 4 questions. We have 4 concerns. We have Arthur, who's saying, given the lower efficacy of AstraZeneca, what is the ethical backup of continued use, given that it's very low on variants? Then we have Desai, who's asking, should Indian women aged between 18 to 60 take AstraZeneca, given the risk of thrombosis? And then there's a question about what should a person do before taking a jab? Is there a ritual? There are the do's and don'ts. There was something raised when you're talking about efficacy, there was nothing about Moderna. So somebody asked about Moderna, and there are quite some concerns about Sinovac. The data, and since it's used in quite a number of developing countries. And finally, there's a question about the efficacy. How long is the vaccine going to protect us? Is it going to be an annual jab like the flu vaccine? And for the mentors, we have Christian Zawea, who's saying there's a lot of misconception in Liberia that the vaccine is intended to spread the virus. So what do you do in a situation like this as a journalist? And also we have Patrick Hakiza, Congolese refugee in a Uganda camp running an online platform. He's saying there's a lot of misinformation, rumors, and a lot of people saying they have remedies. So if in a situation like this, he's trying to foster vaccine confidence amongst refugees, what do you do? Because the refugees are saying we have to wait, we'll wait and see what happens. Let others take first, then we'll follow. Thank you.
Okay, now you've asked a lot of questions that'll take a long time to answer, but I'm going to give you short answers to the best of my ability. Some don't have short answers, but let's try. So if AstraZeneca is only 10% effective in South Africa, is there any value to this vaccine? The answer to that is yes. There's a lot of value to the AstraZeneca vaccine. Its value lies in those countries that don't have this variant. This variant is quite restricted in terms of the countries where it's dominant. So in most of the world, you have basically the D614G variant, against which AstraZeneca is quite effective. So I would have no hesitation in rolling out the AstraZeneca vaccine in many parts of the world where the 501YV2 variant is not a concern. In a country where 501YV2 is a concern, I would be very hesitant to roll this vaccine out. I would want to much rather aim to roll out a vaccine that we know has better efficacy. Not just because it's low efficacy against mild and moderate disease, and we don't know its efficacy against severe disease. It might be good, might not be good, but it's because if we are seeing low levels of efficacy against mild and moderate disease, that's a lot of disease. A lot of people get mild and moderate disease. Moderate disease often needs hospitalization. So, you know, sometimes, but you're dealing with, large numbers of people who will still be getting infected. So for those reasons, I think AstraZeneca has an important role to play, but in settings where 501YV2 is not dominant. By the way, AstraZeneca has a lot of advantages in that it's easier to handle and so on. I would say many of its advantages have been now surpassed by the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is just as easy to handle. higher efficacy, much more consistent against the different variants, and only needs a single dose. So from all told, we now actually have better vaccines than AstraZeneca. AstraZeneca was earlier, was proven to be effective earlier. And so it was, we only really had that as a choice very early on. Now we are, more spoiled for choice. We have better vaccines that we can prefer. Second question you asked is, what about thrombosis? How serious is it? Well, the evidence suggests that thrombosis is essentially a problem in younger women. And in that group, the rate of thrombosis varies from about 1 in 50,000, which is what they showed in Denmark, to about 1 in a million. The true value is probably somewhere in the region of around 1 to 2 cases per million population vaccinated. So when you get to such a low side effect rate, we weigh up the benefits and we say, the benefits just far outweigh that. And so have the regulators use that same principle. I mean, there is no medication other than placebo that's, has no effects, has no side effects. All medications have side effects. By the same principle, if you gave people penicillin, the anaphylaxis against penicillin is about 1 in 100,000. And in some populations, even as low as 1 in 10,000. So penicillin is even more dangerous by that token. And penicillin, if you get anaphylaxis, kills you. So you can see for all medications, we weigh this up. I would say all the evidence suggests that the issue of thrombosis is, and I mean, it has to be said, this is a very unusual form of thrombosis and in very unusual places. And even more unusual, occurs with a low platelet count. So for us as clinicians, this is a very odd kind of disease, and we don't really understand it. We just know it to be unusual because there's a platelet factor antibody that seems to be involved. So all told, this issue of thrombosis should not be a deterrent to any person who carefully assesses the situation and looks at the facts objectively. There is no reason to be concerned. You should continue to take the vaccine despite its side effect of thrombosis because it's so rare. The third is, what are the do's and don'ts of vaccination? I don't really know if there are do's and don'ts, but I can tell you that if you have an immune condition, if you have autoimmunity, for example, you need to have your doctor give you an assessment as to whether you should take the vaccine. Because in fact, this morning, I spent the morning trying to deal with a patient who has side effects from Johnson & Johnson due to autoimmunity. Now, that kind of situation you need to assess. So if you have a bleeding disorder, if you have a situation of some kind of immune dysfunction, or if you are taking immunosuppressants, all of those, I would say, get a doctor's view before you take a vaccine. And those are, just a handful. So 99.9% of people don't ask, so just walk up, fill your app, get your vaccine, you're fine. What should you do? I would say that one of the big problems I have found is when those getting vaccinated, there's just too many people at the vaccination sites, and so people don't maintain social distancing. So please do maintain social distancing, keep your mask on. I don't want you to go there and get infected. And we already have seen this. So I don't know if you've seen the data from Israel. Vaccinated people have a higher incidence of COVID in the first 14 days after vaccine. And so we worried that going to the vaccination site might also be a risk factor. So please follow the rules when you go to a vaccination site. What about Moderna? Moderna, you see, most of what applies to Pfizer applies to Moderna. The two vaccines are very similar. They both use the same basic technology. They have the same backbone. So remember, the three key vaccines are using the same insert, right? They're using Barney Graham's from the VRC. Barney's insert, remember, Barney was doing this from SARS-CoV-1. So when COVID-2 came, he already had this sorted out. And he worked out the cleavage site. He worked out what the insert should look like. And so his insert is used in Moderna, it's used in Pfizer, and it's used in Johnson & Johnson, right? The AstraZeneca uses a different insert, and Sputnik uses a different insert. But those three vaccines have the same insert. So they present to the immune system very similarly. So the challenge with Moderna is that I don't really have any clinical data on Moderna other than the studies that Moderna did, and they only did them in the US. So I can't compare it. I can just tell you that it works very well in the US, really well. And I have no reason to think it works any differently from Pfizer at this point. Sinovac. So I saw the data on Sinopharm, and I have to tell you, I was impressed. The Sinopharm the vaccine uses a completely different technology to any of the other vaccines, right? It uses what is called whole kill technology. That's a technology that's really old. We really know that technology well. When I was a young doctor, and now I'm going back to the 1980s, when I was helping make viral vaccines for chickens, we used to take the virus, culture it from chickens, and we would kill it with heat. And we'd use the heat inactivated viruses as a vaccine. It works quite well. And there are many other vaccines that do that, and they work quite well. And Sinopharm similarly works quite well. And it's a pretty easy vaccine to make. It's a lot cheaper. And the evidence shows that it's well over 80% effective, pretty good safety profile. And in fact, WHO recently reviewed it and put it into their list. So Sinopharm is now an accepted vaccine at WHO, which means COVAX can distribute it. That's Sinopharm. Sinovac is a different vaccine, and that's a little bit more complicated because I don't have all the evidence. The challenge with the Sinovac vaccine is they didn't publish the data. So when you ask me questions, I can't answer. If you ask me about, Sputnik V, I can answer the question. Their paper with all their data is published in the Lancet. So I can just go to the Lancet and I can look at and tell you what the answers are. As it stands right now, the Sinovac vaccine, the evidence I have seen, suggests that it's probably quite good. But I would want to see the full data. I'm fussy like that. Call me old-fashioned. I don't believe press releases. Press releases, you're trying to sell a product. You're not trying to convey the whole scientific picture that we as scientists, we want to see it warts and all. We want to see the ups, we want to see the down, and most importantly, we want to see what you did, because then we can be convinced that what you did supports the answer that you've given us. So on Sinovac, I'm not as confident because I haven't seen the data to the same extent, but what I have seen is pretty good. I'll go to the last question. How long is vaccine immunity? Well, that's an answer we don't have for a very simple reason that the first vaccine that showed efficacy was, those results were only available in November last year. So we actually don't have any clue about how long vaccine immunity will last. What we do know is that both Pfizer and Moderna have published papers. The Pfizer paper was in the New England Journal of Medicine, where they presented their 6 months data. So for 6 months, the vaccine still protection as well as it did in month 1. There's been no fall off in month 6. we'll have to wait until those participants in the trial get to month 12, and then we'll know whether it's effective. When I look at the levels of antibodies generated by mRNA vaccines, I have no reason to believe that they will present any problem in the short term. They should last for years. I'm not anticipating that we will see, some drastic fall off in immunity by 1 year or 2 years. So I'm not anticipating we'll need to revaccinate in such a short time. The boosters may be necessary, but they may be necessary at a longer interval. But that's speculation. It's not based on data because we don't have data beyond 6 months at this time. I think I've answered your questions.
Yes, you have, Prof. Thank you very much.
I did have one last question which relates to exactly what Dr. Karim said. The Indian government has been changing its recommendations about the duration of the gap between the first and the booster dose. So first they said about, up to 8 weeks. First they said 4 weeks, then 8 weeks. And then the week before last, they said 16 to 18 weeks. And now just today we got an advisory saying that please take your second dose 3 months after the first one. So what's your what would you recommend? What are your thoughts on this? Thank you.
Okay, that's a question we can answer. So it depends on which vaccine you're talking about. The mRNA vaccines are given at very short intervals. Like Pfizer is given 21 days, Moderna is given at 28 days. Both of them in that time interval produce pretty good boosting immunity at 21 and 28 days. There is now new data that's become available that shows that for the Pfizer vaccine, the immune response is much better at 42 days rather than 21 days. So in other words, take your second shot of Pfizer at 6 weeks rather than at 3 weeks. Actually, the data shows that it's even better if you take your Pfizer at 3 months rather than at 3 weeks. But those are not clinical trials. So a regulator will be very hesitant to go with that data. That's observational data. But the company will need to pull together a whole lot of data to convince a regulator that if you change the interval, that you will get the same efficacy that you saw with the original trial, because they can't repeat the trial. We can't do those studies again. So as it stands, for the mRNA vaccines, it looks like at least 42 days looks much better than 21 days, and 3 months looks even better. But these vaccines are licensed for 21 days between the doses. For AstraZeneca, they actually did a study, and they showed that if you went with the original timing of the AstraZeneca, the response was quite poor. If you increased the time frame between the doses to 12 weeks, you got a much better response. In fact, in the original release of the information, they said something unusual that didn't make sense. They said those individuals that got half the dose had 90% efficacy. Those who got the full dose had 70% efficacy. Now that's weird. When they did a reanalysis, the problem was that those who got half the dose actually got a long interval. They had the 3-month interval. So the 90% efficacy is actually a long interval, not the half dose. The half dose was just an accident and a mistake that was done in the study. I mean, there are several mistakes done in their studies, by the way. I mean, it's an embarrassment when you read the papers and you look at the quality of the science done for AstraZeneca. But, the data, and that's what we have. At the moment, AstraZeneca has enough data to convince regulators to switch to 3 months. So if you want the best response you can get from AstraZeneca, go with 3 months. And of course, J&J is just one dose, so it doesn't matter. Thanks.
Thank you
I
so
want to
much.
say thank you. So thank you. And Tole, thank you for taking us through questions in the chat. I couldn't help picking up another very important question. And as you were talking, Professor Karim, it just struck me that we're in such an unusual situation that people are talking about mixing various vaccines that become available to them, perhaps self-concocting the distances between doses, as you've just discussed. We've never experienced that before in terms of vaccination. It's always been, there's one vaccine and this is where you go and this is what you do. So, I mean, how do we read that, just, as citizens of this world? And then, of course, how do we report on that as journalists?
It's 17 hours.
Sorry.
Okay, I think one needs to be very careful about people doing home experiments and then believing that that's science, because the scientific method is rigorous and it is quite demanding in terms of the ability to ensure that biases do not intervene. As it stands, there is zero evidence to suggest that mixing vaccines is either safe or efficacious. So in my view, it would be really unacceptable to recommend that somebody mix different vaccines. That is not research unless it's done under a protocol. There is a study underway in the UK that is assessing mixing of vaccines. And so that study we've been waiting for, because it will answer the question. Personally, I am not sure that all the different combinations will work if you mix them up, but some are likely to work, especially if you're taking combinations where your booster is known to give you a much more substantial immune response, which mRNAs do. So mixing an mRNA, giving an mRNA as a booster against another dose, another different type of vaccine might be useful. But I'm speculating. I have no evidence to support anything of what I said. I think the answer is, simply put, we do not know, don't do it, and wait for the data. When the data become available, we'll then be guided as to what mixing is feasible and what is safe.
Thank you so much, Professor Karim. Such an important message. Follow the evidence, wait for the data, wait for it to be peer-reviewed, published, and approved. That is a very important message of the course, and I want to wrap up by just reminding everybody that the course is there for you to enroll in. We are able to follow your details. We're in touch with you, of course, and one magnificent aspect of this course is that the mentors you see here and experts like Professor Karim can be brought into the course, because you know how an online course works, it's self-study, but we can decide together, as we've done with a team in Ethiopia, as we're doing tomorrow with a team in Kenya, to look at a specific module and say, let's follow it up with a discussion. Tomorrow in Kenya, there will be a workshop for journalists just on immunity, just on the immunity section. So it's a matter of studying that section and then having this kind of rich discussion that we've just had. So I really want to thank you so much, Professor Karim, for illustrating, the importance of, listening to the science and the scientists, and also doing our own research and studies before we start writing these stories as journalists. We've combined the sciences, the clinical science and behavioral science that make up this story. And we're very excited to let this into this world, and we're here for you to answer your questions. Thank you, Professor Karim, again for joining us. Thank you to all of those on the line who've joined, and we will certainly be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karim.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.